Alright, so in this lesson we're doing this super fun Fire Shockwave. Now if you've been following the lessons, you already know how to make something like this. Basically the shockwave is done in the exact same way as the smoke shockwave earlier in this course, and then I'm just adding some burning fuel to it. So I would encourage you to see if you can do this on your own, but for now I'm gonna set it up from scratch as always. So I'm working in units, centimeters. 1 unit is 10 centimeters. And let's just go under standard particle systems and create a PF source. For the birth, I'm gonna say emit start 0 and emit stop 3. So we're emitting for 3 frames. And I'm gonna do a rate of 5,000 particles. And as before, you can click on the PF source node and just say viewport 100%. So you can see all of them in the viewport. And I'm gonna say integration step 1/4 frame. Now under the speed, let's do icon center out. So that's gonna give us that shockwave look. Let's delete rotation and let's delete shape. And I'm gonna add a delete operator. And I want them to last for 6 frames with no variation because I kind of want that uniform look. And for the speed, I'm gonna do 1000 centimeters with no variation, and let's do divergence of 10. So that should give us this pretty cool shockwave. Now maybe it could be a little bit faster, so maybe let's make this 2000 just so that it spreads out further. All right, that should work. So now everything else is something we've already done many times, so I'm just gonna make a grid as always. And I'm gonna make a source, and let's add the particles as our source. And so really what I'm trying to show you guys is that the process of setting this up is always the same. You're always gonna need some kind of a source. You're always gonna need a grid. And then it's really just about playing with these settings to get the desired effect. There's really nothing to be afraid of. And really at this point, you should be able to set up a ton of really cool fire effects just by playing with everything that I've showed you so far. So let's disable temperature, disable smoke, let's enable fuel. Motion velocity, maybe let's do 2. We can leave outgoing velocity at 100 and maybe we can give it a noise of 0.5. And for the grid settings, as always, let's set the Z as gemmed minus. We can enable adaptive grid by smoke 0.01. with 5 margin. We can give it a bit more resolution, so maybe 6 centimeters cell size. So the cooling, I actually kind of want to be pretty high because as you can see, the fire is born and it kind of dies pretty fast. It's just sort of like a fast fire shockwave. So maybe we can do the cooling something like 0.3. We can do smoke dissipation 0.3 as well. Now I actually want the fire to stick to the ground instead of rising up very fast. So I'm gonna do fuel buoyancy -3, maybe 0.5 for smoke vorticity and 0.5 for the temperature. We can do PCG symmetric for conservation with 36 for quality, and steps per frame, let's do at least 2. And then under fuel, let's enable burning. Again, ignition temperature 290. I would do maybe energy 5, fuel depletion, let's do 2. Smoke amount 1, smoke threshold, we can do maybe 0.5. Propagation, I would do maybe just 1. So just to recap, energy is the amount of temperature that's created. Full depletion is how fast the fuel burns out. Smoke amount and smoke threshold control the amount of smoke. And propagation basically is explosiveness or expansion. Or under output, let's output fuel and velocity. All right, so I'm running the sim and I feel like we're running into the issue again where the source is way too close to the edge of the grid. So I'm gonna stop it and raise the particle flow emitter higher up. And that should give us some nicer results. So let's run it again. All right, so I'm running the sim and we're getting some better results, but I can't see any of the fire yet. So I'm gonna go back under the source and maybe let's set the fuel amount to 2. And then let's go back into the dynamic settings for fuel. And I'm gonna set fuel depletion to maybe just 1 and set the propagation to 2 just to get a bit of a more explosive effect. And maybe let's set the energy to 10 and see if they'll make a difference. And let's go under volumetric options and so by raising the multiplier way up, you can see that the fire is there. It just seems to be very weak and it's not really showing up as much as we would like. So let me run the sim again with these settings and see if we get something nicer. I'm gonna go back under the settings here and set the fire multiplier back to 5. And maybe let's actually lower it even more to just 1. And now we can play with the curve here to get some kind of a nicer look. And maybe we can increase physically based back to 1. And I feel like at this point we are actually emitting too much temperature and fuel again. So I'm gonna dial some of those settings back down. So let me stop this and let's go back under fuel and set the propagation back to 1, set the energy back to 5, and then go under the source here and set the fuel back to 1. So sometimes you have to go around in a circle to figure out why things are not working as you would expect. But with these settings, it should look much nicer. So alright, so it's looking good. One more thing I did was I increased the energy to 8, which seems to be a nice middle ground. So if I stop the sim and show you what we have, this is where we're at right now. I think maybe the smoke is rising a bit too fast. I kind of want it to stick to the ground. So I would go under dynamics, and for the smoke buoyancy, we can do maybe let's do -2, just so that it's not too heavy. But that should work pretty well. And now you can just play with the shader like we did many times before. So I would just maybe lower the brightness of some of the hottest spots again. And you can play with the physically based. Sometimes it adds a nice amount of this orangey lighting to the smoke, so that's more of a personal taste. You can also always just click through the opacity modes and see if you get something nicer. So use smoke opacity looks kind of subtle and nice in this case, so that's something to consider. But maybe I would just lower the fire multiplier a little bit, and then I would maybe introduce again a bit more of that orangey fire color to the fire, so maybe something like this. And as soon as you're happy with it, you can just go back under the grid and raise the resolution. So I would do maybe something like 4 centimeter cell size, about 10-12 million total cells. And you can go under dynamics and maybe increase the quality to 100, and you can do 4 steps per frame for your final simulation, and that should give you some pretty nice detail, and you can render it out the same way as we've done before in this course. So really this was just a fun little lesson to show you that you now have the knowledge of all the main pillars to create all sorts of fun fire effects. So I would encourage you to experiment, and I'll see you in the next few final lessons of this course.